Okay, today is 13.4, page 1041. Hope you had a good weekend. We are going to do today what's called composition of functions. And to perform a composition, it's very straightforward, but it basically means to take one thing and plug it in to another. So when we're going to do compositions of two functions, it basically means to take one function and substitute or plug in to another function. And if you have some color, sometimes it helps, or a highlighter or something. It makes it a little bit easier to understand and to see when you can actually color something and plug it in and see what's going on. Okay? But basically, think of substituting, only instead of substituting a value for x, like plug in 5, you're going to plug in an entirely new function altogether. It gets a little complicated, but it should be very simple if you use some colors and highlight some things. So what we are going to do is we're going to start on number 8, which is on page 1045. We're going to look right here at 8. And these are different ways that you can compose. Alright, so first off we can add two functions. This is f of x plus g of x. What you can kind of do is just rewrite it in another sense. Okay? What it means is here in parentheses f plus g of x, which means basically think of distributing, which means f of x here, and over here we'll have g of x here, and we'll add it in the middle. And this just simply means, very simply, to add whatever f of x's answer is plus whatever g of x's answer to get a total answer. Pretty straightforward. Same idea here with subtracting. By the way, this is not a composition. This is just different notations. Okay. This again, distribute f of x. Distribute here g of x. We're subtracting the two functions, so we'll take and subtract whatever f of x's answer, subtract it from whatever g of x's answer is to get a total answer. And we'll do some practice problems here in just a second. This one here says the same idea. Notice f and g are in parentheses next to each other and then x, so we distribute f of x. Over here we distribute g of x. Since f and g are right next to each other, we put a dot, which means we're multiplying. Let's put this dot here. And this means to multiply f of x's answer times g of x's answer and get a new total. And this last one here, as far as this new notation, is when you divide. So think of distributing f of x on top, distribute g of x on the bottom, which obviously means what we're going to do is to divide f of x's answer by g of x's answer and get a total. Okay, so those are just different ways that you can rewrite notations. This one here is the important one. Let's start this one. This is now called a composition. And it's very different in this. Number one, there are no signs. There's no plus sign, no minus sign, no division sign. And yes, they are written together. Like, see here is f parentheses g parentheses x again, which, by the way, this is pronounced f of g of x. But very different than multiplying, because multiplying, the f and the g are right next to each other, but there's no parentheses. Where in composition, the f and the g are next to each other, but there is a parentheses in between. Also, you can put the little, looks like a little circle, f circle g. That little circle to me says the word of, because it starts with the O. But f of g of x. What this simply means is whichever one is closest to the x first. The g is closest to the x. What it means is you're going to take g of x and plug into f of x. And we'll practice that a little bit today. And that is the composition function what we are trying to work on. So before we do all of that and actually get into the algebra of it, we have some graphs, and we're going to explain what this means on the graph as far as compositions and multiplying and adding, etc. Okay? So on your graph over here, this will be our f of x function. This will be our g of x function. If we have an f function or a g function, we refer to that specific graph. Okay? So in this first one, it says f of 3. Well, f of 3 means we're using the f function, and we're going to find the answer at 3. And this is an x input. which x's are along the x-axis. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3. Here's the 3 on the x-axis, and we find out where is the dot along this line, and here's the dot. The question is, what answer output is that? And that output is -1. So f of 3 gives us an answer of -1 according to the graph. Very simple process. This one over here is the g equation. I'll do that in red. I'll re-highlight this. This is the g equation. So we're using this g situation here. And on this one, all we are going to do now is we are going to take the inverse. And remember, the inverse and the y. Which means when you see g -1 of 4, what that means, this number 4 is not an x, but this is a y value. This y value of 4 means we go on the y-axis, 1, 2, 3, 4 right here, and we say, where is the x that made that answer? Well, this dot is here at 4. This dot represents an x number of, looks like what is to be 5, so this answer must be now 5. In other words, g inverse of 4 is 5 because if x was 5, y is 4. So those are just going to find those graphs. Okay? Here is where we get into our composition. And the reason this is a composition is because it says f parentheses g parentheses 4. If you have two letters for two equations and you have parentheses separating them, that means you are doing a composition. And where you start on the composition is in the innermost parentheses, which is right here. We're going to find g of 4 first. Now notice it does not say inverse, so this is an x number for the g function at 4. So we're going to go over here and find 4 on the g equation, or the g graph. 1, 2, 3, 4. And notice we get an answer of 0. So this answer so far is 0. G of 4 is 0. But we aren't finished because we've got to bring this f down. Now we have to find out what is f of 0. So we're taking the answer from g and plugging that answer into f. This again is an x input on the f graph because there's no inverse, which means we're going to go to the f graph and find 0. Here's 0 on the f graph. What answer do we get? What dot do we get for the f input at 0? We get this number right here, which is 2. So our final answer is 2. So if you have to rewind this at all, go ahead and do so. I want you to try with your table. D, notice we'll start in the parentheses first, f of 4, then we'll plug it in. After we get that answer, plug that into the g equation and find your final answer. I want you to try D. I want you to flip over on the back side. I want you to find E, F, G, H, I, and J at the end here is just a plus sign in the middle. So as a hint, you're going to find f of 0. You're going to find g of 0. And you are going to do the addition of both of those. You'll find f of 0's answer, g of 0's answer, add them together to get your total answer. So with your table, try all of those through j and then start back over. Once you get all those answers, you can check them off.